Tonight at 11, a sinkhole uncovering a shocking scheme.
Investigators discovering a homemade tunnel leading toward a bank. So who's been digging for dollars?
Just after midnight, the street looked like any other in the quiet neighborhood. Rows of tidy lawns and darkened windows stretching under the pale wash of moonlight. Porch lights glowed softly. A dog barked once and then fell silent. Nothing about the modest two-story home at the center of the block suggested that within the hour, it would become the focus of a full federal operation. Unmarked vehicles rolled in first, engines cut before headlights faded. Doors opened in careful sequence. Dark figures stepped out, vests catching slivers of light. Radios whispered. The air carried that unmistakable tension that precedes forced entry, when everyone involved understands that whatever waits inside could change in a heartbeat. The homeowner had not resisted when agents knocked earlier that evening. In fact, he had seemed almost relieved, calm, polite. He stepped aside without protest, hands raised slightly, eyes drifting not toward the door, but toward the hallway that led to the basement. That detail would stay with the agents long after the search began. On paper, he was unremarkable. A former civil engineer who had left his firm years ago. No criminal record, no known disputes, taxes paid on time. Neighbors described him as quiet but courteous, the kind of man who shoveled snow for others without being asked. He rarely entertained guests. He rarely left the house for extended periods. That, at first glance, was the only anomaly. The anonymous tip had been vague but urgent. It described unusual shipments delivered at night. It mentioned reinforced steel beams disappearing into the basement. It claimed there were vibrations beneath the soil that could be felt from 2 houses away. At first, it sounded like paranoia. Then satellite imaging suggested subtle disturbances in the ground around the property. Subtle, but deliberate. Inside the home, everything appeared meticulously ordered. Furniture aligned perfectly. Surfaces spotless. Not a single photograph on the walls. The absence of personal history felt louder than clutter ever could. The basement door creaked open under a gloved hand. A narrow staircase descended into shadow. The air grew cooler with each step. Concrete walls framed shelves of tools arranged with almost surgical precision. Power tools, welding masks, sealed containers of industrial adhesive, the kind of equipment consistent with construction projects. But no permits had ever been filed. It was the far wall that drew attention. At first glance, it appeared identical to the others, painted the same dull gray, yet a faint seam traced a rectangle near the floor. One agent knelt, running a finger along the line. Another tapped gently with a flashlight. The hollow echo confirmed it. There was space beyond. Removing the panel required effort. It had been sealed flush, camouflaged expertly. When it finally shifted inward, a breath of cold, stale air rushed out. The beam of a flashlight pierced the darkness, revealing a narrow shaft descending at a steep angle. Someone had dug deep. Reinforced steps led downward, each lined with rubber grips to muffle sound. Electrical wiring ran along the side, feeding dim industrial lights spaced at measured intervals. This was not the reckless burrow of desperation. It was engineered. Agents descended carefully, weapons lowered but ready. The tunnel leveled out after 20 feet, extending forward in a straight line. The walls were braced with steel supports anchored into compacted earth. Ventilation ducts hummed softly overhead, circulating air through filters. Whoever built this understood structural integrity. The first chamber appeared roughly 50 yards from the house. It contained shelves stacked with sealed containers labeled in meticulous handwriting, food rations, medical supplies, water purification systems, a survival cache that could sustain a person for months. One agent exhaled slowly. "Prepper," he muttered under his breath. But the tunnel did not end there. It continued, curving slightly as it extended beyond the property line. Ground-penetrating radar later confirmed what the agents could only suspect in that moment. The passage ran beneath neighboring yards, threading quietly under fences and gardens, an unseen artery beneath the community. Halfway down the second stretch, they found something that shifted the atmosphere entirely. Cameras embedded in the walls, angled not toward the interior, but toward the entrance they had just breached. The homeowner had been watching the tunnel from below. Wires fed into a small control alcove carved into the earth. Screens flickered to life as power surged from a backup battery. Recorded footage scrolled past, showing empty corridors for weeks at a time. Then, occasionally, the homeowner himself descending alone, carrying tools, checking supports, adjusting dials. He never appeared hurried. He never appeared afraid. The tunnel widened once more into a larger chamber reinforced with concrete. This room was different. Not storage, not survival. At its center stood a heavy steel door, far more industrial than anything else underground. A keypad glowed faintly beside it. The homeowner, still seated upstairs under supervision, had offered no resistance. But when asked about the tunnel, he had smiled faintly and said only, "You're too early." The keypad required a tactical bypass. Sparks flew briefly as the lock disengaged with a mechanical groan. The door swung inward. Inside, the chamber was immaculate. Walls lined with soundproofing foam, a long table at the center, multiple monitors mounted along the far side. At first glance, it resembled a private operations center. Then the screens activated. Live feeds filled the displays, not of the tunnel, not of the basement, but of locations across the city. Traffic intersections, public parks, parking garages, each labeled with dates and times. Some feeds were current, others archived. The realization hit slowly. This was not a bunker built to hide. It was built to observe. Stacks of hard drives lined the shelves, each cataloged with precision. Years of recordings, patterns tracked, movements logged, notes scribbled in binders describing routines of strangers in chilling detail. He had mapped them. The agents exchanged glances that needed no words. This was surveillance on a scale that defied explanation for a single individual. In the far corner of the chamber stood a second door, smaller and unmarked. Unlike the first, it bore no keypad, only a manual latch. When opened, it revealed a narrow room barely large enough to stand in. The walls were covered in handwritten equations, diagrams of infrastructure, sewer systems, electrical grids. The homeowner's professional background suddenly loomed larger. At the center of the small room sat a single chair facing a corkboard. Pinned to it were newspaper clippings spanning decades. Disasters, power outages, structural collapses, each circled in red ink with notes linking them to design flaws. He had not been hiding from the world. He had been studying its weaknesses. Back upstairs, when confronted with the evidence, the homeowner's composure faltered for the first time. His eyes flicked toward the basement door again. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I was preparing." "For what?" an agent asked. He hesitated. "For when it fails." The scope of the investigation expanded overnight. Digital forensics teams combed through the hard drives. What they found was both methodical and unsettling. He had identified vulnerabilities in municipal systems, noting how a single compromised junction could cascade into widespread disruption. He had not sabotaged anything. There was no evidence of action taken, only observation, analysis, preparation. Yet preparation for what remained unclear. Interviews with former colleagues painted a portrait of gradual disillusionment. He had once been optimistic, advocating for stronger infrastructure standards. When proposals were denied due to budget constraints, something shifted. He began speaking of inevitability, of collapse not as possibility but certainty. He withdrew soon after. Neighbors recalled faint vibrations late at night years ago, assuming it was minor renovations. Delivery drivers remembered unloading heavy crates labeled as construction materials. No one had questioned it. He was, after all, an engineer. The tunnel's final stretch had not yet been fully explored. Ground scans suggested an additional branch veering deeper underground, beyond city property lines. Agents returned with reinforced teams. The air grew colder the farther they traveled. The supports here were thicker, the lighting dimmer. Footsteps echoed in a way that suggested greater space ahead. When they reached the end, they found a cavern carved into natural rock. Unlike the previous chambers, this one was unfinished. Raw earth framed a massive cylindrical object partially embedded in the floor. It resembled a capsule. Wires connected it to generators humming softly nearby. Its surface was reinforced composite, sealed with bolts around a circular hatch. Frost clung to its edges despite the temperate underground air. No labels marked its purpose. Carefully, agents approached. One placed a hand against the metal. Cold. Artificially cold. The homeowner, when shown a live feed from inside the cavern, closed his eyes. "You opened it," he whispered, not as a question. The bolts were removed one by one. The hatch lifted with effort, releasing a hiss of compressed air. Inside lay not a weapon, not stolen artifacts, but something far more perplexing. A second chair. Strapped into it, facing upward, was a life-sized mannequin constructed with uncanny realism. Silicone skin, synthetic hair, features eerily similar to the homeowner himself, only younger. Electrodes lined its scalp. Sensors ran along its limbs, feeding into monitoring equipment outside the capsule. It was a prototype. Documents recovered from encrypted files clarified the impossible. He had been attempting to design a self-sustaining life support pod capable of preserving a human body indefinitely in the event of environmental collapse. Cryogenic elements, automated nutrient systems, neural interface mapping. He had built a contingency for himself, not to attack the world, but to outlast it. The mannequin was a test subject, a simulation to refine the systems before human trial. There was no evidence he had yet entered the pod, but logs suggested he was close. Psychological evaluators later described a complex profile, not delusional in the conventional sense, hyper-rational, obsessively focused on worst-case scenarios, convinced that systemic failure was inevitable within his lifetime. He had watched the city for years, cataloging stress points, waiting for signs. The tunnel was never meant for escape in the traditional sense. It was meant to isolate him from the initial chaos. The surveillance allowed him to determine when that chaos began. The pod would carry him through the aftermath. A plan decades in the making. When asked why he had not warned authorities if he believed disaster was imminent, he answered simply, "They don't listen until it's too late." The discovery sparked national debate. Some labeled him dangerous, a man whose distrust could have led to unpredictable action. Others saw a cautionary tale about neglecting infrastructure and dismissing experts. The tunnel beneath the quiet home became evidence in court, then a case study in academic circles. Engineers dissected his designs, reluctantly impressed by their sophistication. Ethicists questioned the morality of self-preservation at the expense of community. As for the homeowner, he remained eerily calm through the proceedings. "You think I'm extreme," he told an investigator during a recorded interview, "but you came because you suspected something hidden beneath the surface. You were right. There is." Months after the arrest, crews filled the tunnel with concrete, sealing it permanently. The house was sold. New families moved into the neighborhood. Children played in the yards above where reinforced steel once threaded through earth. But rumors lingered. Because during the final sweep before demolition, technicians detected faint electromagnetic signals beneath an area that had not appeared on any blueprint. A section deeper still, unreachable without destabilizing the surrounding ground. They marked it as an anomaly. Budget constraints prevented further excavation. The official report concluded that all significant structures had been neutralized. The pod removed, the surveillance dismantled, case closed. Yet one detail refused to fade. On the last hard drive recovered from the operations room, among years of footage and analysis, was a single video file time-stamped the night before the raid. It showed the homeowner seated in the underground chamber, staring directly into the camera. He spoke calmly. "If you're watching this, it means you found it. That means the surface is still functioning. That means I was wrong." He paused, glancing at something off-screen. "I hope I was wrong." The video ended there. No manifesto, no threats, just a quiet admission. Experts continued to debate whether he was a visionary consumed by fear or a cautionary example of intellect untethered from trust. What remains undeniable is the scale of what he built alone, unnoticed beneath a peaceful street. Neighbors still say they never suspected. They remember him as polite, distant, helpful with snow. They remember the night the vehicles came and the silence that followed. And sometimes, when the ground settles after heavy rain, a faint hollow echo can be heard beneath the lawns. It is probably nothing more than shifting soil, settling foundations, probably. But the idea persists that beneath ordinary surfaces, unseen systems hum quietly, watching, waiting, preparing for outcomes most would rather not imagine. The agents who descended that first night rarely speak publicly about the operation. Those who have admit that what unsettled them most was not the sophistication of the tunnel or the eerie realism of the pod. It was the intention. He did not build it in rage. He built it in certainty. And certainty, when buried deep enough, can reshape the ground above it without anyone noticing until the surface begins to crack. In the weeks following the discovery, investigators kept returning to the site, documenting, mapping, and trying to understand the full extent of what had been built. Every inch of the tunnel had been meticulously planned, yet hints of improvisation here and there suggested that the homeowner had adapted his designs over time. Small detours, extra supports, unusual wiring patterns. It was as though the structure itself had evolved alongside him, growing in secrecy beneath the community. The media frenzy began slowly at first. Local stations ran cautious segments, highlighting the sheer scale of the underground construction. Then, when digital forensics teams released sanitized images of the interior chambers, the story exploded. The public could not reconcile the polite, quiet man next door with the engineer capable of producing something that rivaled a military-grade facility beneath a suburban home. Psychologists speculated endlessly on his mindset. Some suggested he had been gripped by obsessive-compulsive tendencies, channeling anxiety into precise engineering. Others argued that his actions were the work of a visionary whose fear of societal collapse had driven him to prepare for contingencies beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. Whatever the case, the tunnel became a symbol of secrecy, of preparation, of human ingenuity used in solitude. Meanwhile, forensic teams continued to uncover minute details that seemed almost impossible. Fingerprints were scarce, suggesting he had worn gloves consistently while working. Every tool had a designated storage location. Even the dust patterns indicated deliberate care, as though the environment itself were being maintained for inspection. It was the obsessive precision that unnerved many agents more than the tunnel's sheer scale. Neighbors began to notice small anomalies in retrospect: the soft hum of machinery late at night, a peculiar odor during certain seasons, packages arriving under the cover of darkness. None of these had seemed unusual in isolation, but together they painted a picture of a man living two lives, one above ground, one beneath it. The pods and capsules discovered in the cavern sparked a separate line of inquiry. Engineers examined the technology, marveling at the sophistication of the life support and monitoring systems. The neural interface simulations were unlike anything previously tested outside a government or corporate lab. His work suggested not just survival, but an attempt to preserve consciousness and control over one's environment in a post-collapse scenario. Agents reviewing the logs noticed the meticulous trial-and-error approach he had taken. Early simulations had failed, sometimes catastrophically, with sensors misfiring or environmental controls collapsing. He had refined each system meticulously, using the mannequin as a test subject over months and years. It was clear he had been preparing for himself, but the implications of such technology fascinated and alarmed those who examined it. During interrogations, he explained his motivations calmly, almost philosophically. He described a vision of society where infrastructure, governance, and human behavior were increasingly fragile. He spoke of vulnerabilities invisible to most, noting that even small disruptions could cascade into widespread chaos. He had not intended harm. He had intended preparedness. Yet the scale of his work and secrecy made law enforcement wary. Despite legal pressure, the homeowner never wavered in composure. He cooperated, explained systems, and even suggested ways the tunnel could be safely decommissioned. Yet he never disclosed everything. Certain areas remained inaccessible, either due to structural risks or intentional concealment. Investigators often remarked on the unsettling sense that he had left parts of his work deliberately beyond scrutiny, as though preserving secrets for some unknowable future moment. As months passed, a team of engineers and demolitions experts carefully filled and sealed portions of the tunnel. The capsule in the cavern was removed for further study, and surveillance equipment dismantled. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, but for those who had descended into the depths, the experience left a lingering unease. The precision, the foresight, and the obsessive calm of the homeowner created a story that would not fade easily. Meanwhile, archives from the tunnel began to reveal patterns that raised new questions. Recorded surveillance footage, meticulously labeled and stored, suggested the homeowner had studied population movements, infrastructure usage, and human behavior in ways that went beyond personal safety. Patterns, anomalies, and even social interactions had been noted with clinical precision. It was as though he had been preparing not only for collapse but also for understanding how people reacted under stress. Speculation grew regarding the deeper branch of the tunnel, the section never fully explored. Electromagnetic readings hinted at wiring and mechanisms that had survived the demolition. Some agents theorized that additional systems might have been left active, intentionally or unintentionally, continuing to monitor the environment above. Even sealed and forgotten, the underground network retained a ghost of its former vigilance. Ethicists debated the morality of his preparation. Was it the mark of a responsible engineer anticipating disaster, or a man whose obsession had created risks for others by lying in wait beneath their homes? Legal scholars argued that he had committed no crime, yet his secrecy and scale of operations suggested potential for unintended consequences. The duality of his work, ingenious yet isolating, protective yet invasive, became a case study in law schools and engineering forums alike. The public's imagination ran wild. Blogs speculated about secret chambers left undiscovered. Social media theorists debated whether he had truly been preparing for environmental collapse or some larger, more enigmatic purpose. The narrative had all the elements of a thriller: a quiet, suburban man, a hidden tunnel, advanced technology, and a plan that could have far-reaching consequences. Even the agents involved found it hard to move on. In quiet moments, some confessed to colleagues that the experience left them unsettled, not because of physical danger, but because of the meticulous foresight displayed by a man so ordinary on the surface. His work had blurred the lines between genius and obsession, between preparation and paranoia. Months after the final sealing of the tunnel, reports circulated of a faint electrical signature emanating from beneath the property. Not powerful, not constant, but detectable. Technicians were baffled, attributing it to residual wiring or incomplete demolition. Still, agents who had been inside whispered privately, speculating whether the homeowner had left an enduring trace of his presence underground. Some neighbors reported minor anomalies as well: subtle vibrations, the occasional flicker of streetlights above the property, even a soft, metallic hum that seemed to rise from the ground after rainstorms. While most dismissed it as coincidence, others remembered the rumors and the extraordinary story, and unease quietly settled back into the street. The city's engineers reviewed his recovered notes with a mixture of awe and apprehension. His calculations were precise, his systems thorough. The capsule and pod design was decades ahead of public knowledge, suggesting expertise well beyond a typical engineer. Some researchers speculated that if technology like his were ever fully realized, it could preserve life through catastrophic events. But at what cost? Academics began publishing papers on the tunnel and its implications, dissecting his motives, ethics, and the feasibility of his designs. Debates raged. Was he a warning, a visionary, or an anomaly beyond conventional categorization? Courses in urban planning and emergency preparedness used the case to teach about both human ingenuity and the unpredictability of isolationist planning. In private, some agents reflected on the psychological impact. Watching the recordings, navigating the underground corridors, and discovering the pod had created a sense of vertigo, not just physical, but existential. They had peered into a life so meticulously hidden, a mind so absorbed by anticipation that it was almost impossible to comprehend. Months turned into a year. The house changed hands. A new family moved in. Children played above where steel beams and sensors had once threaded the earth. Life above ground returned to normal, but the story persisted. Occasionally, visitors would recall the extraordinary investigation, and whispers would surface of things still hidden beneath the lawns. Despite public closure, investigators quietly acknowledged that parts of the underground complex remained unexplored. Structural concerns prevented further digging, leaving open the possibility that additional chambers or systems remained intact. The potential for discovery, or danger, was still there, invisible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, the homeowner's video recordings continued to circulate among experts in emergency preparedness, engineering, and psychology. His calm delivery, measured reasoning, and almost philosophical approach to disaster preparedness made him an unlikely celebrity in certain circles. Some praised his foresight, others condemned his secrecy. But all agreed on one point. The scale of what he accomplished alone was extraordinary. A final examination of the recovered systems revealed meticulous redundancy. Power backups, environmental controls, sensor networks, and communication lines were all designed to survive independently for months. Even if the main grid failed or human intervention ceased, the infrastructure he had built could operate autonomously for an extended period. Agents concluded that the system had been designed not to harm, but to endure. Its sophistication suggested years of planning and perfecting, a combination of engineering skill, obsessive attention to detail, and profound foresight. Yet the psychological weight of such solitude and preparation lingered, leaving those who studied it unsettled. The last known video, recorded the night before the raid, captured his final message. If you're watching this, it means you found it. That means the surface is still functioning. That means I was wrong. I hope I was wrong. His words were simple yet layered with implication, a mix of relief, regret, and enduring foresight. In the end, the story of the tunnel beneath his home was not about crime, surveillance, or sabotage. It was about human obsession, the need to prepare, and the lengths one individual could go to in pursuit of certainty. It raised questions that remain unanswered. How much foresight is too much? And at what point does preparation become a private world unto itself? Even today, experts, neighbors, and agents occasionally revisit the tale. In quiet moments, they recall the depth, scale, and isolation of the underground complex. They remember the chilling calm of a man who had mapped an entire city in his mind and beneath his feet, anticipating failure, preparing for the worst, and leaving behind a legacy of hidden complexity. Beneath the ordinary lawns and suburban streets, the story endures. Beneath the foundations of what appears peaceful, human ingenuity can hide, quietly observing, quietly waiting, quietly preparing for outcomes beyond imagination. And the memory of that night, the descent, the capsules, the monitors, and the whisper of certainty remains with all who were there. Even now, the ground is silent, but the sense of what might still linger beneath is impossible to shake.